Moving on with our program for today, we have a panel discussion for you, 3 speakers. The topic is New Tools for Scottish Genealogy. And I'm going to moderate that, and I'll introduce each of our speakers, who will then speak for about 15, 20 minutes. That'll take us for about an hour. And then we'll have another 30 minutes for discussion between them and questions from all of you. So we have quite a bit of time for this. It's a big subject. Let me start off by introducing our first speaker, TESSA Spencer, who's with the National Records of Scotland. These bios, by the way, are posted on the website if you'd like to look at them later or print them out. But just briefly, TESSA Spencer is a history graduate from the Universities of St. Andrews and Glasgow, where she studied medieval history and the history of medicine, respectively. She's a professional archivist and has worked at the National Records of Scotland for 19 years in various roles. In her current post as head of outreach and learning, she's responsible for education in the archives to connect and engage everyone with Scotland's history, heritage, and culture. She also facilitates access to the archives for higher education collaborations and partnerships. I believe that Tessa has pre-recorded her remarks. I hope she'll be able to join us live later for the question session, but there is a 5-hour difference between us here in the States and Scotland. So that's a hopeful, but we'll see. I think we're going to turn to the pre-recorded presentation by Tessa now.
Good evening from Edinburgh. Thank you for coming to my talk and to the organisers for inviting me to speak at this conference. I'm Tessa Spencer, an archivist at the National Records of Scotland, or NRS. In this talk, I will give an overview of the Scotland's People website and how you can use it for research purposes. I will also highlight some new tools and resources, as well as anticipated developments next year. But first, a brief introduction to NRS, who we are, where we are, and what we do and hold. NRS is a non-ministerial department of the Scottish Government and was established on the 1st of April 2011, following the merger of the National Archives of Scotland and the General Register Office for Scotland. We have a duty to collect, preserve, and produce information about Scotland's people and history, and make it available to inform current and future generations. Before records were officially stored in the archive, there was no permanent accommodation for Scotland's national records. For hundreds of years, they were stored in various locations. The accommodation was far from satisfactory, and the archives were damaged by damp and vermin. This proper repository would become General Register House. Designed by Robert Adam, it is one of his finest public buildings. It's also the first purpose-built public record repository in the British Isles and is one of the oldest archive buildings in the world, still being used for its original purpose. The foundation stone was laid in 1774 and it opened to the public in 1789. It cost in total £29,000 to build, which is worth approximately over £2.5 million in today's money. This engraving from Robert Adams' plan was created by James Bezier, showing a unique view of the building as if cut in half from east to west through the centre line of the building. NRS's collections are housed in 4 buildings in Edinburgh, 3 of which are in the New Town: General Register House, New Register House, and West Register House. The 4th, Thomas Thompson House, a modern purpose-built repository, can be found to the west of the city. NRS holds around 80 kilometres, 49.7 miles of records, which are stored in secure and temperature-controlled rooms. The records span from the 12th to the 21st centuries, touching on virtually every aspect of Scottish life. We are responsible for the public and legal records of Scotland, but we also have many local and private archives. They relate to a variety of subjects, including the church, law, government, and everyday life. We hold and make available one of the most varied archive collections of records in Britain. NRS holds records created by the Scottish Government from the 12th century to the present day, as well as records of the Scottish census and post-1855 civil registration system. Scotland's People is the official Scottish Government resource where you can access digital images of statutory registers of births, deaths and marriages from 1855 to the current day, census returns from 1841 to 1911, old parish registers or OPRs from 1553 to 1854, legal records and more. Once you have registered an account on the website, you can search the indexes for free and pay to view the images. There is guidance on the site about the different record types available and how to use them for different types of research. The statutory registers are official records of births, deaths and marriages. They have been kept in Scotland from 1855 onwards, when compulsory civil registration was introduced to replace the system overseen by the Church of Scotland, the established church. In more recent years, registers of divorces, dissolutions and civil partnerships have also been kept. The statutory registers can be searched by personal name, but access to the digital images of the original registers for modern records are restricted for internet research to protect the privacy of individuals. Births 100 years, deaths 50 years, and marriages 75 years. Muriel Campbell's birth entry is one of millions which can be accessed via Scotland's People. She was born on the 1st of February 1918 in Edinburgh, although it became better known throughout her life as the author Muriel Spark. Muriel was educated at James Gillespie School for Girls in Edinburgh, which helped inspire her most famous novel, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. Details given in her birth entry include the time and place of birth, her parents' names, the date and place of their marriage, and her father's occupation. This entry from the Statutory Register of Deaths records the tragic accidental death of Alexander Stewart, a messenger at New Register House, located next door to General Register House in Edinburgh. On the 1st of March 1872, as he was taking coals from a hoist on the second floor of the building, he fell 30 feet through the hatchway to the area below and was killed instantly. He had been employed as a porter in the Stamp Office in New Register House for around 16 years and was 62 years of age upon his death. The cause of death given here states probably concussion of brain, the result of falling down the shaft of a lifting machine and alighting upon his head. To improve searching the statutory death index, we have been adding the mother's maiden name, where they are recorded, as this is not always the case, in order to help reduce the number of search results. For example, if you are looking for the death of Mary Smith, the number of matches will be vast, but a Mary Smith with the mother's maiden name of Fraser would greatly reduce the number of results returned. The search criteria can be further refined using place or year, age, etc. Next year, we plan to complete this task, and we have already started to add the mother's maiden name to the statutory birth index, though this search refinement is not available yet on the site. The birth records for 1921, deaths for 1971, and marriages for 1946 will be released on Scotland's People in January 2022. Please sign up and look out for our January Scotland's People newsletter, which will highlight these records. An official census of the Scottish population has been taken every 10 years since 1801, with the exception of 1941 during the Second World War, and in 2021 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. However, little information about individuals has survived for 1801 to 1831. From 1841 to 1911, enumerators prepared transcript books after the collection of household schedules from the head of every dwelling, institution and vessel. Census returns are lists of people living at each address, giving ages, places of birth and other information about them. St Kilda lies more than 40 miles west of the Outer Hebrides of Scotland's northwest coast. On the 29th of August 1930, with a population of just 30 inhabitants and 10 households, the island was evacuated. 19 years earlier, the 1911 census captured details of the community. The crowded households indicate how unhealthy and inadequate the islanders' houses were. Most adults pursued their traditional livelihoods, working their crafts, gathering and spinning wool, weaving tweed and fishing. Some of the inhabitants listed here, for example, 3 of the younger McKinnons at No. 1 Main Street and Finlay McQueen at No. 2, were among the islanders who stayed to the end in 1930. The census recorded a total population of 74 islanders, all natives, except 2 born in Harris. We are working hard on preparations to publish the 1921 Scottish census as early as we can in the second half of 2022. On Scotland's People, you can search the registers of the Church of Scotland, some other Presbyterian churches, as well as the Roman Catholic Church in Scotland. The old parish registers, or OPRs, comprise the records of births and baptisms, banns and marriages, and deaths and burials kept by the individual parishes of the Church of Scotland before the introduction of civil registration in 1855. The oldest register dates from 1553, baptisms and banns from Errol, Perthshire, and the earliest record is for Christine or Christine Hay, who was baptised on the 27th of December 1553. Although there was a requirement from 1552 that parishes record baptisms and marriages, many did not commence until much later, and some more remote areas only have registers from the early 19th century. Some registers have been lost or destroyed, and the condition of the surviving 3,500 is variable. The parish minister or session clerk normally assumed responsibility for maintaining these registers, but since there was no standard format employed, record keeping varied enormously from parish to parish and also from year to year. As a result, the information may be sparse, unreliable, and difficult to read. Here is the baptismal record for Euphemia Chalmers Gray. This tells us that her parents were George Gray Esquire of Boweswell, writer in Perth, and Sophia Margaret Jameson, daughter of the sheriff substitute of Fife. It gives us her date of birth and baptism and where it took place. Euphemia married one of the most influential figures of the 19th century, the art critic and artist John Ruskin. This marriage was not a happy one, however, and ended in separation and annulment, scandalising Victorian society. On Scotland's People, as of March this year, you can also search for church records that are not indexed by personal name, most notably the church court records using the virtual volume search. You can navigate to this page by clicking on the new Search for Kirk Session and Other Church Court Records featured block on the home page or via the Search Our Records page. In virtual volumes, there are more than 1 million pages from around 6,000 volumes from the courts of the Church of Scotland, and in 2022, we will continue to add more records. If you are registered with the website, you can search the records and browse through the images on the site at no charge. You can also save or download images for a small fee. To give you a bit of background information about this record set, a new system was introduced to run church affairs, education and poor relief following the Scottish Reformation in 1560, the General Assembly, synods, presbyteries and kirk sessions. The records created by church courts are very useful for family and local history research. They contain details of key events and communities across Scotland, mostly in the form of evidence in church court cases, offering a vivid snapshot into the everyday lives of our ordinary Scots. In this period, cases could involve paternity of children and irregular marriages, and the church also carried out many functions later taken over by local government. These included school education and poor relief, registering births, deaths and marriages, and disciplining parishioners for what would now be termed antisocial behaviour, such as drunkenness, cursing or breaking the Sabbath. The records also show that in an age of private healthcare, the ministers and sessions sometimes paid medical bills for the poor. There are also accounts of exceptional events such as witchcraft trials, outbreaks of epidemics, crop failures, extreme weather events, and the civil wars. For family historians, these records are often the first step away from sources, such as registers of births and census returns, which are not indexed intensively by personal names. The records can give details of births, marriages, burials, and the movement of people from one part of Scotland to another. Evidence given in Kirk Session and Presbytery cases can give fascinating details of how our ancestors lived, worked, and worshipped. Of most interest for genealogists and local historians are the minutes of the Kirk Sessions, which typically contain a detailed and often colourful record of the discipline the minister and Kirk elders handed out to errant parishioners for offences such as drunkenness, swearing, breaking the Sabbath, quarrelling, and sexual misdemeanours. Throughout the Kirk Session minutes, there are numerous examples in almost every parish of irregular marriage, the sin of fornication, and also antenuptial fornication. In other words, having sex with your now husband, wife, before the marriage had taken place. How these acts of intimacy were discovered varied, from witnesses coming forward, perpetrators confessing, or in some cases because of the impressive investigative skills of the Kirk Session. The case of Thomas Letham in 1801, who approached the session requesting a line to get his child baptised, is one such example detailed here. The Cadder Kirk Session records that the child was born 9 weeks less than 9 months from the date of the marriage. Mrs. Kirkwood, a midwife, certified that it was born 4 weeks before full term. The line was not thought satisfactory, and therefore he was appointed, along with his wife, to appear before the congregation to be rebuked for the sin of antenuptial fornication. Following the Reformation, the religious hospitals associated with the monasteries were largely abandoned, and the Reformed Kirk was concerned about the poor from both a religious and moral sense. The First Book of Discipline declared that each parish should care for its own poor, at least those such as widows, the elderly, and those whose age or disabilities left them unfit to work. Kirk Sessions were also responsible for supporting abandoned babies, sometimes recorded as exposed within the records. Factors such as the shame of conceiving out of wedlock and the harsh realities of poverty meant that many illegitimate children were left to be brought up by the parish. The demand for financial support at times resulted in a lack of poor relief funds, and a Kirk Session were often anxious to locate the parents, as much as for the child's sake as for monetary reasons. Aid was also given to communities during exceptional circumstances. This example from the Cleash Kirk Session minutes records on the 3rd of January 1783 that aid was provided during the harsh winter of 1782 to 1883, when there was critical shortage of meal and grain. The minutes state that several childers more than they could furnish would be necessary to secure the people from starving from famine. A cholder or children from the French children means kettle, was a measure of dry volume. The session, therefore, with the advice and concurrence of the heritors, agreed to advance £10 sterling from the poor's funds to assist in purchasing what might be needful in order to preserve the poorer sort of the people at a lower rate than a common market price. NRS holds over 170,000 topographical maps and plans and architectural and engineering drawings from a wide variety of sources. Most drawings relate to other collections we hold, such as court or estate records, and these records can be useful for family and local history research and enhance the value of the visual material as historical evidence for buildings and places. A selection of these maps and plans are available to search and view for free via Scotland's People. We've recently added over 4,500 post-war agricultural planning maps, as well as over 400 heritage plans. The Department of Agriculture for Scotland plans of farm boundaries and types of farming are a snapshot of Scotland from 1944 to 1954, showing land use for farming, hill grazing, market gardening, forestry, and more. The plans were created to help safeguard food production during and after the Second World War. Coverage of the farm boundary plans is close to national, while farming type was recorded less comprehensively, with priority given to areas likely to be considered for development. These records can help build up a picture of how land use in a particular area has changed over time. They are a valuable source for research on agriculture, land use, and post-war planning more widely. This slide shows an Ordnance Survey 6-inch plan showing types of farming and farm boundaries outside Dunfermline Fife, 1944 to 1945. We've also added hundreds of images to our existing collection of heritage plans, with almost 1,000 from the collection now online. A heritor was a landowner or property owner with liability for financial contributions to parish burdens. For example, the upkeep of the parish church, the school, the poor, and the wages of the school teacher and stipend of the minister. These new plans mostly show architectural drawings of churches and manses around Scotland. I will now highlight some other online resources that you may find helpful for your research. NRS's website provides information on records relating to Scotland's people, places and history. On the homepage, you can find links to the catalogues and indexes as well as search guides. Each collection of records held by NRS has a catalogue or index to help you find the right material, whether it's a file or a single document. Most of the records we hold are described on an electronic database, the NRS catalogue. The catalogue allows you to search descriptions of our records and is a good starting point for any research you wish to conduct. On the NRS YouTube channel, there is a short tutorial which provides a brief introduction on how to use the catalogue to search for records relating to your research or area of interest. The online research guides have been compiled by members of staff and provide useful information about some of our most popular record sets and how they can be accessed. Different topics covered in NRS's records are listed alphabetically. These guides are a good place to begin your research, as they not only provide instructions on how to search the records, they also often give suggested archive references, which are invaluable for searching the archive catalogue. On the NRS YouTube channel, there is a short tutorial which provides a brief introduction on how to access the NRS research guides and how they can help with your research. If you are new to research using original records prior to the late 18th century, the Scottish Handwriting website provides practical online tuition to help improve your skills. Assistance is also provided in our guide on reading older handwriting and a glossary of abbreviations, words and phrases. You could also sign up for the University of Glasgow's Future Learn course on early modern Scottish paleography. The Dictionaries of the Scots Language is a culmination of two major dictionaries of the Scots language in searchable format. The resource provides invaluable assistance with tracking down the meaning and historical origin of Scots words. This official guide to the records made available via NRS and Scotland's people is indispensable for family historians and biographers. The 7th edition is packed with up-to-date information about how to trace Scottish genealogy in the unique treasure trove of Scotland's National Archives. It is available for the first time in both paperback and ebook versions. You can purchase a copy from all good booksellers or online via the publisher Berlin and other retailers. In this talk, I've highlighted the initial release of the Church Court Records on Scotland's people, additions to the Maps and Plans record set, as well as new search tools on the site. Next year, we're anticipating the release of 1921 births, 1971 deaths, and 1946 marriages in January, and the 1921 census records in the latter half of the year. We'll also continue to add to the Church Court Records and virtual volumes. In addition, we're planning to launch a significant new collection of indexed prison registers during the year. There will be more news to follow on this. 2022 has been designated by Visit Scotland as Scotland's Year of Stories, and NRS hopes to engage throughout the year with online activity and resources to celebrate stories inspired by, written or created in Scotland. You can find out more about family and historical research on Scotland's people and keep up to date with news and events by subscribing to our newsletter and following Scotland's People on Facebook and Twitter. Please also follow the National Records of Scotland on Eventbrite so you can keep up to date with our online public talks programme. A selection of past talks are available to view on NRS's YouTube channel. Thank you for listening to this talk. I hope you have found it interesting and useful for your research. If you have any questions, I'd be delighted to answer them in a Q&A session. We may not have time to answer them all, so please do get in touch with us at education@nrscotland.gov.uk with any comments and queries you may have, and we'll do our best to assist you. Thank you.
I want to thank Tessa Spencer for a very interesting, far-ranging, informative talk about Scotland's people and the other online records that are available to all of us who are interested in exploring our Scottish heritage back on the other side of the pond. Once upon a time, you had to go to the National Records Office in Scotland if you were from the States or Canada, which was quite an adventure. And that's no longer the case. So that's something to keep in mind. Hopefully, Tessa will be able to join us for the Q&A at the end of this session. But if she isn't, I would point out that Graeme McKenzie, who is our third speaker, is a professional genealogist based in Inverness in Scotland. And he uses these records all the time. So we will be able to take some live questions and give some specific answers about Scotland's people and the other online records before we're finished today. I'd like to turn now to our second speaker, Susan Miller, with the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society. Welcome back, Sue. Sue was with us last year as a speaker. It's good to see you again. Very briefly, let me tell you about Sue, and then we're going to hear from her. Susan Miller is a New York Genealogical and Biographical Society Director of Programs. She's editor of their New York Researcher magazine, a managing editor of the New York Family History Research Guide and Gazetteer. She has researched her New York and New England families for more than 25 years. She organizes the New York State Family History Conference and has presented genealogical lectures at national and regional conclaves. Beyond genealogy, Sue is a lifelong sailor, racing and cruising, and past Commodore of the Manhasset Bay and Frostbite Yacht Clubs. Welcome, Sue. Nice to see you again. And what would you like to share with us today?
Thank you, John. First of all, I appreciate the invitation. It's wonderful to be here for the Scottish North American Community Conference. So I will say I do also research my family in Scotland as well, and you'll see a little example of that. So today, going to talk about tracing your Scottish ancestors from New York and elsewhere. Some of the techniques and goals that we'll look at here are applicable across the United States, not just New York. And for most of us, that goal is to find that place of origin. Many of us would like to visit the place that our ancestor or ancestors were from. And I've had the privilege of doing that and enjoyed it very, very much. I will go through, and I'm going to spend most of the time on looking at some techniques that you can use to apply in your genealogy, in your family history, to help you find that place of origin. And I'll also introduce you to some of the tools from the NYGNB and elsewhere. So one of the techniques that really is the most successful is to research in the United States. For myself, it's in the state of New York, to find the place of origin for people. And that research usually will take you through all types of records. And in order to do this, oftentimes it is, to me, a checklist approach that you would want to make sure that you hit every single one of the record types that are needed to be successful in your search. In my CV, you heard about the New York Family History Research Guide and Gazetteer. This is a book that the NYGNB has published, and it literally has a table of contents that I often use as a checklist. The chapter titles, as you go through the book, help me make sure that I don't miss any record sets. And that can include things that you might not think about that might have to do with your family history research. People are very familiar with censuses. It's wonderful that the National Records Office of Scotland National Records of Scotland has so many of the Scottish census. Many, but not all of the censuses for New York and other places are online. Many of them are. Not everything's indexed. And we do have to keep that in mind. But we use those common records as well as many other things. And something that you'll see in a minute is land records. Sometimes people miss that, and it's quite important. So you want to search all the records. And another technique that really can be helpful is researching siblings of the primary line that you're researching, all the relatives you can find, and community members. There is a renowned genealogist who has nicknamed that technique the fan club. That's Elizabeth Shown Mills, calls it the fan club for friends, associates, and neighbors. So going beyond the family can help you in your research. So I want to just throw that out there for you. Taking a little bit different tact from actually looking at records first, I'll give you a little bit of a case study. Agnes Martin, born in Scotland in 1832, died in New York, 1881. No records that I have ever been able to find name her parents. Those records in New York in the United States, nothing directly states who her parents are. In this time period for New York, you would expect that legally she was supposed to have a death certificate, but it was the beginning of the time that that law was going into effect. And in fact, she does not have a death certificate, and death certificates are very common for the United States to have a place on the death certificate where you would name parents and name potentially the place that the parents were from, or the place that she was born, or he. But she doesn't have that death certificate. So that wasn't very helpful. So this search for all types of records, was undertaken, no real success to find that direct link. But some of the New York GMB experts told me you need to find the land records. And it took me a little while, I will admit. Land records seemed quite intimidating at the time. They were not indexed for New York at the time, so the technique to find them was a little more involved. Eventually, I did. I dug in, and I was able to find some land records. Now, what this is this is actually called a quitclaim, where Agnes Martin, she was my research subject, and her husband, and they lived in the town of Olean in Cattaraugus County, were giving up. The quitclaim gives up any interest you might or do hold in the property. And she is giving that up to John A. Laurie and William B. Laurie of the town of Linden, and for $1. Now, $1 might be trying to hide some money, but more often it's probably about a familial or other type of relationship. So going into some of these unusual records, this doesn't tell me specifically where she's from, but this record will lead me to other records that will show that. And it takes a little more work than that. Her sister had a quitclaim like this. The father had recorded, he didn't record it, the children recorded a deed with the same property description. So all of these things, while not direct records that tell who her parents are showing who her siblings are, and therefore what her maiden name is. So looking for the siblings, I looked for and finally found her brother's death certificate. And in fact, that shows parents of William Laurie and Grace Maxwell. Scotland. Nothing more specific than that, unfortunately. So more digging, this time pulling not just my direct ancestors' death certificate, but the eldest son that she had and brother of my direct ancestor. And finally, this one does show Agnes Laurie, and it shows Dumfries. So at least I've got the general area and can go from there. So this is the type of technique that can lead to success when you can't find any direct records that show where someone is from. I'm going to show you for a moment a couple of the resources that the NYGNB can provide to you as you're trying to learn and do this research. We have webinars, a whole free webinar series that's free to the public when they're live usually. And We have some on Scottish records. In the center, you see the Introduction to Scotland's People. Thank you to Tessa Spencer for having done that for us last year. Michelle Leonard, who is an expert genealogist in Scotland and also in DNA, did one for us on making the most of online sources for Scottish family history, and other presenters as well. So these types of programs are available to you, and the recordings of them are available to NYGNB members. We also have things like bibliographies for research. So those are very helpful. Not every item in the bibliography is going to help you, but a lot of them will. In addition to that, the online records that we have for the NYGNB have many Scots in them. That family line actually went back to the name of Maxwell, so I popped in Maxwell into the search, and you can see there's pages and pages and pages of Maxwell. It's clearly, if this was your search, you'd want to narrow that down with names and things like that. But you can go in and view the articles, and I'll show you an example of that. We've got, this is records of the First and Second Presbyterian churches in New York City, and you can see that the transcriptions of these are available. These were done for our journal, which is called the New York Genealogical and Biographical Record. The short name is the record. You'll also see NYGNB record. So members have access to every single one of the copies of every page of the full archive of the NYGNB record. So you can find many of Scottish ancestors in here, and there are quite a few church records that are transcribed as well. The NYGNB can also help you in doing your own research by doing consultations. You sit down with a genealogist, usually over Zoom these days, or a phone call, and get direction in where you should go next in your research. We have the online records. You saw that. You saw a little bit of the educational programs like the webinars. We also hold a conference. We've held one every year for the last few years. The next one is going to be in Albany, New York, and I hope we will have some Scottish content in that. We certainly are looking for that. And we do research tours and have publications as well. So that's my commercial for the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society. Going back to tips for your research, religious records, many times people from Scotland from earlier days were Christian, oftentimes Protestant, also Catholic, and the Protestant denominations that came over to the US and renamed Presbyterian, and there were a lot of Reformed congregations as well. They could be congregational, they could be Reformed, Dutch Reformed, German Reformed, any of those sorts of names. And the congregations we find sometimes vary over time. They change from one name to another. So don't discount a church that's in the area that your ancestors lived just because it doesn't seem to fit, say, the Presbyterian denomination. Keep an open mind about that. There weren't always a lot of churches, and people and the congregations would change slightly over time. The other tip that I'd really like you to think about is when you're finding those parish records, look at not just the main pages for baptisms, marriages, and burials, because there is often information in other pages in the session minutes. Tessa spoke about those. And the color that they can give, they can be wonderful. And when they're online on some of the major websites, not every page is always indexed. I'm going to show you an example of that now. This is on Ancestry.com, and it's from the US Presbyterian Church Records. And this is actually in Linden, New York. And this note says, Saturday, the 3rd of May, baptized William Verity, son of Robert and Isabel Little, and also Lewis Wells, son of Alexander and Mary Howden. Now, when you look at this record on Ancestry, it is not indexed. If you search those names, this is not a page that is going to come up in the Ancestry index. Another one that you can see here that gives you clues to places is, this says on August 3rd, Freedom, that's the town there, admitted to the church, membership, by certificate, Mr. William Semple, also, and wife, also Janet Semple. The first two from the United, and I think that says maybe Reformed Church of Scotland, Strathaven, Lanarkshire. So that is actually giving the place where the family was from. And again, this is a page that's not indexed. So if you don't dig deep into these collections, you could miss a wonderful clue like this as to where someone is from. There are other pages that are indexed, and this little icon here, if you see where the little red dot is, if that is grayed out and this type of box does not come up when you click it, that's a page that's not indexed. This page is indexed, so we see that. So that is one of the bigger tips for looking at the religious records, especially on some large collections like this. You have to look to see if every page is indexed or not. You might have to read a lot of pages, but you'll learn a lot about the community and the lives of the people in that. So we hope you'll visit the NYGNB online. Our website is newyorkfamilyhistory.org. We have an e-news that comes out only about twice a month, tells you about events that are coming up. It gives you research tips and articles to read. So you can visit us online and sign up for our e-news there. So thank you so much for having me today. I am happy to stay on later and do the live Q&A with you. And I hope you have learned at least one or two tips for tracing your Scottish relatives in the United States to lead you back to the place of origin in Scotland. I'd look forward to doing so myself next time I go visit my sister who lives in Scotland.
Thank you so much, Sue. I did say that I'd wrap this mention into our discussion for our Canadian friends. We don't have a Canadian genealogist on the panel with us today, but as many of them know, Americans tend not to know this. Lots of loyalists during the American Revolution, period of the American Revolution, lots of them were Scots, and many of them chose to leave in 1783 at the end of the war and emigrated to Canada. There's an organization called the United Empire Loyalists, who are the descendants of Loyalists who emigrated voluntarily from the United States to Canada after 1783. Joanne Tuscan, who is Secretary of CASIC, our sister organization, is a member of the United Empire Loyalists, and she knows all about that. So if you're interested in checking into your Scottish heritage, you're Canadian, from Ontario especially, but elsewhere, and you know it was, you can take them back into the end of the 18th century, you might want to check United Empire Loyalist records, because people who went to Canada were given land in compensation for what they lost in the United States. And so they had to enter a full set of records about who they were, where the land was located, exactly in the States, what's now the United States, when they left, and what the worth of it was, and how many people were in the family, et cetera, et cetera. Great source of information for Canadians. We're going to turn now to Graham McKenzie, also a good friend of the SNAC conference, who was with us both last year and the year before in Detroit. Graham is president of Highland Roots, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a genealogical research firm based in Inverness in Scotland. He's also chairman of the Association of Highland Clans and Societies. Let me tell you a little bit briefly about Graham. He's a Scottish historian and genealogist with over 30 years experience researching and writing about the Highland clans in particular. He studied history at Cambridge and worked initially as a rock music writer and broadcaster, developing an interest in country and bluegrass music while helping to organize the prestigious Cambridge Folk Festival. Graham is the founder of Highland Roots, and I'm sure he's going to mention a bit about that. In 2013, he published Genealogy in the Gaeltacht, Clan and Family History in the Highlands of Scotland, and he followed that up in 2015 with Highland Clan and Family Histories, a guide to published histories, genealogy, and family trees. His latest publication is called Sept Names and Surnames of the Highland Clans. He's the founding chairman of the Association of Highland Clans and Societies, which has a membership representing over 40 clans and serves on the Scottish government's Clan and Ancestry Forum group. He travels regularly to North America. Graham, you're on.
I was first of all introduced to fellow family historians in the area in the Highland Family History Society. And that is still going strong, and you'll find a website for it on Highland Family History, highlandfhs.org. And it has all sorts of links there and resources. The most important resource that the Family History Society does is burial indexes, that's to say gravestone inscriptions. Because death certificates only came in 1855, and that was the first time that there was compulsory registration of deaths. The OPRs have very little in the way of deaths, especially up in the Highlands. So really gravestones are often the very only source of information about deaths. So it is an important part of the Highland Family History Society to collect these transcriptions and publish them. And they're published, there's a burial index on the website with a grid of the initials for the names, which you can go to, and you press on the initial, that brings up a PDF with a list of names and for each gravestone there. And for instance, there's one for my 2 times great-grandfather, John Macmillan, died 1800, age 59 in Old Kilmore. And in the old days, I would need to buy the booklet that gave me the transcription. But now, Highland Family History Society have made an arrangement with Find My Past, which is one of the big commercial ancestry sites online. And you can actually go to Find My Past. You've got to pay a subscription, of course, and you can get all the transcriptions for all the Highland Family History Society monumental inscriptions there on Find My Past. Now, other family history societies throughout Scotland, and there are all over Scotland, there are family history societies, and this is one of their most important things that they do. They collect family monumental transcriptions, and they publish them. But some of them have now gone on to publishing them digitally. One that I use particularly is the Dumfries and Galloway Family History Society, because there are a lot of Macmillans down there. And as the clan historian for the Macmillans, I'm more often searching for Macmillans. Susan may be interested in this if she hasn't discovered it already, which she probably has. But the Dumfries and Galloway Family History Society, all their booklets of transcriptions are now digitized and can be downloaded online once you've paid for them, of course. Another local source that I thoroughly recommend people to investigate are local history and heritage societies. One that I've been looking at recently is Heritage Ardnamurchan. Ardnamurchan is a part of the West Highlands, very westerly indeed, and it's a poor area where a lot of people were cleared off from the land in the 19th century. So there are a lot of lost villages. So I'm looking at a picture here of a village that now is just a series of the foundations of houses, and there's nothing else there. When you find an ancestor from Ardnamurchan and the name of the township they came from, you can't find it on a modern map. You can go and look at old maps, and you'll find on the Ardnamurchan heritage site a map showing all the old townships, which is extremely useful. But of course, there are other sources of maps, and I'm going to talk quite a bit about maps this evening. I enjoy maps, but they are very useful to the genealogist. So there's a map of Ardnamurchan to be found on the National Library of Scotland's website. In this case, it's an estate map from 1733, which actually appears to have been drawn up so that the owner could advertise how many minerals were on his land, so that mining companies could come in and buy the land from him and get the minerals, lead and tin and that sort of stuff. The National Library of Scotland have a wonderful collection of digitized maps, and their website, maps.nls.uk, well worth going to look at, all sorts of maps. But often for the genealogists, the most important maps are the Ordnance Survey maps, the earlier ones. The Ordnance Survey is the official government body for mapping the country, originally for military purposes, and they started surveying the whole country systematically in the mid-1800s and produced a series of maps in different scales. The largest one is huge, but the most useful usually for us is the 6 inches to the mile maps. And for instance, I'm looking at one from Glenurquhart, where my ancestors came from the 1870s, and it shows a place called Ravrulich, and that's where my 3 times great-grandfather was born in 1836. There is nothing there now. It's just an open field. You wouldn't know there was ever a habitation there were it not for the fact there are these wonderful old maps that will show you where they were. Once you found out where your ancestor lived, you want to try and find some more information about them. So you can go and try and find who owned the land. Now, Scotland's People has a sort of twin site called Scotland's Places, and that's very good for finding the places. It has access to maps and things as well, but it also has the land tax rolls, 1645 to 1831, otherwise known as valuation rolls. And these list the owners of all the estates in Scotland, and because, of course, the government wanted to tax them. And the amount of information on these rolls varies depending on what time it is and where they are, and basically whoever was producing them and what they thought was important. But very often you'll find individual townships and farms mentioned under the ownership of the laird. Once you know who the laird is, you can then go and look for estate papers to see if you can find rent rolls and things in the laird's papers. Now, something that might help you with this is the Scottish Archives Network, SCAN, their website, www.scan.org.uk, and it can identify papers that are held in all sorts of archives, not just the National Records of Scotland, which obviously has probably the largest collection, and there's the National Library for Scotland does have estate papers as well. Even the National Archives in London has quite a lot of Scottish estate papers. But there are local archives, which obviously have papers, and local university archives too. The Highland Council have a wonderful new archive building in Inverness, and they have an organisation, a not-for-profit organisation called HIGHLAND, which now runs their archives. And they've just produced an electronic catalogue that you can search online, www.highlife.com/archives. They also, HighLife Highland are also responsible for a site called Ambala, AMBAILE, which is called Highland History and Culture. It has a wonderful collection of photographs, old photographs and things. It used to have, on the same site, you could get access to indexes to early Highland newspapers. But these, at the moment, are missing. But I did check before doing this talk, and I'm told that these indexes will be there again very soon, and very useful they are too. Newspapers, of course, are always useful to the genealogist, and there is a British newspaper archive which you can access, looking for newspapers from other parts of Scotland and indeed Britain. And that's www.britishnewspaperarchive.co.uk. And of course, newspapers are on both sides of the Atlantic as well. Now, I'm going to mention 1 or 2 cases that I've been dealing with recently. What I have at the moment looking at is a page from the Gettysburg Times in Pennsylvania. It's actually from 1958, so it's not that old, but it does have a lot of family history in the Gettysburg Times because they had a local historian who was interested in it. And I had been asked to research a gentleman called James Wilson, who emigrated to Pennsylvania in the 1730s or early 40s. And it was in this newspaper column that we find the essential evidence that we're looking for to find out where he had come from. He actually had a family Bible, which the author of the series had seen, although it's been lost since, which he transcribed from. And James Wilson had a minister's certificate saying that he came from Ballyrashane in the county of Londonderry and left in 1736. So where is Ballyrashane? In Londonderry, Londonderry, Northern Ireland. You've probably, most of you heard of that. This probably the second most important city in Northern Ireland. Well, Ballyrashane is to the east of that, just to the east of a town called Coleraine and just north of Ballymoney. There is a website called the Townlands of Ireland, which you can go to find places, and it has maps with an outline of the parishes. And it will show you a map of Ballyrashane. Near Ballyrashane is a townland. That's a small farm or collection of farms, and it's called Tullagore. And there was a family of Wilsons in Tullagore that I think may have been connected with this man, James Wilson, who went to Pennsylvania, although I'm still working on that to find out. But anyway, looking for Tullagore, you go to another website that specializes in maps, and that is the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland, PRONI. And you can put into the interactive maps, historical maps that they have, the name of the townland you're looking for, and up will pop a little box pointing you at the highlighted townland. Incredible detail on these maps, and very, very useful indeed. Now, the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland does have a lot of records of all sorts. It has a lot of databases of early records in Ireland. You probably know that a lot of Irish records were lost in the Troubles of the 1920s. So you can't find a lot of parish records and so on. But the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland does have a lot of estate papers and various other sorts of records, and they are working to put as much of that online in searchable databases as they can. Another very useful website for Northern Ireland, if your ancestors came from Londonderry or the neighbouring county of Antrim, is Bill McAfee's website. Bill McAfee is an enthusiastic local genealogist and historian, and he has, I hate to think how many hours he must have spent, how many weeks, months, years in PRONI going through their papers, logging interesting information and putting them onto his own databases, which supplement PRONI's own databases. So www.billmcafee.com, that's MACAFEE, a version of McPhee. Now, when I'm looking for James Wilson in America itself, I know he died in 1776 in York County, Pennsylvania. But if I'm looking for land records, and I heartily agree with Susan about the importance of land records, I've got to know in which county courthouse to look for the early records and deeds and grants. And we need to know that York County was only created in 1749 out of Lancaster County, and Lancaster County was created in 1739 out of Chester County. And I find that out by going to a great website called Map of US, www.mapofus.org. And it has interactive maps of each state showing the creation of all the counties through the centuries. A great resource again. Now, as I said, I'm going to talk quite a lot about maps, and I'm going to Canada now. In Canada, there were a series of county atlases produced between 1874 and 1881 in the Maritimes, Ontario, and Quebec. And the universities there have been digitizing these atlases. So the University of Prince Edward Island has digitized Meacham's Atlas of 1880, and the McGill University in Ontario have digitized the maps for Ontario. And with these maps, you can drill down to very great detail. So you start with a search page, choose your county. You have the province of Ontario showing all the counties. Select your county, look at a map of the county, divided up into the townships. So I'm looking at Glengarry County, where so many Highland Scots settled, and the townships of Charlottenburg and Lochiel and Lancaster and Kenyon. And then you can drill down further and look at the township maps. So the neighboring county of Stormont, where a lot of Scots settled, to the township of Cornwall. And then you go down to the very great detail and you look at each lot in each concession in the 1880s with the name of the owner or occupier. So in this case, I'm researching a family of Macmillans. And here we have D. Macmillan living in Cornwall Township by a very recognizable squiggle in the Raisin River. Now, D. Macmillan, Donald Macmillan, 1880, born about 1796, died 1884. We can go back from this map in 1880 for 100 years and find another map that was produced in 1786 by the original government surveyor of Ontario, Patrick McNiff, who surveyed this area along the St. Lawrence Seaway in order to divide it up for the Loyalists. As John was saying, a lot of Scots who had fought for the Crown in the American Revolution fled to Canada and were resettled by the government there. And McNiff's maps show these people. So I can then look at the map of Cornwall Township and I can find a 1786 map, and there's the squiggle on the river, and there's Donald Macmillan. Only it's not the same Donald Macmillan, it's his father, 1750 to circa 1816. He was the original emigrant who had come up from New York, and he had in fact gone to New York in 1773 from Le Harbour in Scotland. He was a loyalist who had fought in the King's Royal Regiment of New York. Now, John mentioned one of the sites in that has information about loyalists. Another one is the Online Institute for Advanced Loyalist Studies. And that has a lot of very interesting information, muster rolls for the regiments and all that sort of stuff. Well worth looking at, and it's www.royalprovincial.com. The Library and Archives of Canada, of course, have a lot of information about the settlements. And one of the useful things that you can find on there is the database for searching for land petitions. So this is the petitions that the soldiers and their children put in claiming land because they had served the Crown. And so you can search this database on the Library and Archives of Canada website, www.bac-lac.gc.ca, and go look for the land petitions. Now, if you search in the database, you get up a grid which has the names of the people, the names of the entries for the name you're looking for. I'm looking for an Alan MacDonald. So I was searching for the early records of the family of Donald MacDonald, who was the son of Alan. So I'm looking for the records of Alan, the emigrant ancestor, in Charlottenburg in Glengarry County. And I found this entry for him, 1851, which was a bit strange because he was dead long before 1851. So I went and looked at the original record, a difficult record to read because it's got very sloping handwriting. But once I'd worked out what it says, it was a bit of a revelation because it was a petition by Alan MacDonald's son, but not his son Donald, but by his son Alexander, who was his eldest son and was not known about at all by the family by the descendants of Donald, the other son. So this was a new discovery that we found when we were looking for these petitions. Then, of course, you may want to drill down further and look at how the land progressed after the original emigrant, who it went to in terms of descendants or sales or whatever. So you can go to the Land Records in Ontario sites, www.onland.ca.ui. Go to choose your county, Glengarry, and then you can choose your township, Kenyon or Charlottenburg or whatever, and the concession that you know they lived on, and then you get a list of the transactions whereby that piece of land, that lot, passed from one person to another, maybe inheritance, maybe by sale, or it might be by a deed of some sort. And in this case, again, I was looking at an Alexander MacDonald in Charlottenburg, and it says it's a deed rather than a will or a bargain and sale. And so you can, in some cases, but not all cases at the moment, you can find the registers of deeds online as well. In this case, I'm looking at the Family Search website, which you will all know, and it has deeds for some of these Canadian counties online. This is Stormont County that I'm looking at the moment. And when I went to look at the deed, I found the deed, and what actually I found was a will. And this is not that uncommon. Very often wills went into registers of deeds, and in Scotland, it's not uncommon either. And this is something to bear in mind, that you look at Scotland's people's list of testaments and wills and so on. Bear in mind that's not a complete record, because there are quite a lot of wills that were registered in registers of deeds and have not been discovered and put onto the National Index on Scotland's people. This is a Canadian equivalent. Now, lots of veterans from later wars settled in Canada, particularly the Napoleonic Wars, and I was asked to look into a family of a man called James Simpson, who was married in Quebec in 1820. And his marriage record said that he was in the 99th Regiment of Foot and was a Chelsea pensioner. Now, very few soldiers in those days got pensions. You had to be wounded in action, or you had to be very long serving to get a pension. So for most ordinary soldiers in the Napoleonic Wars, if you want to see the records of them in the muster rolls or the description books, you have to go to London and you have to look at the paper records. But those that did get a pension, their records have been digitized and they have been made available. And again, they're on Find My Past. So again, you pay your subscription and you can look at the actual pension records. Now, in the case of James Simpson, there is a very detailed discharge certificate which gives you the 4 regiments that he had fought in the course of his military career. It gives you a private description of him, saying that he was 5 feet 8 3/4 inches, black hair, dark complexion, etc. And it also tells us he wasn't Scottish, he was Irish. Well, if we were following him through, we could talk about Irish genealogical sites, of which there are many, but we're not. So we'll leave him aside and we'll go back to the question of land records, and now in the US. The US Department of the Interior Bureau of Land Management has an online searchable database for early land records. And another family that I've been looking at over this pandemic period was a family of McKinneys. I was asked to trace this family who ended up in Illinois. And a question that went with trying to trace them is McKinney a name that is a version of Mackenzie, or is it McKinnon? Now, as a Mackenzie, and as somebody who knows about Scottish Gaelic names, I know the answer to that straight away. McKinney is Mackenzie. It cannot be McKinnon. But to convince people that aren't so aware of this is quite difficult. So I was lucky in searching these McKinneys, as I'll tell you. So in 1840, I have this record in the Bureau of Land Management Index of Abram McKinney, who had land in Jersey County, Illinois in 1840. Now, a local history told me that he came from Virginia. And there's nothing actually on the patent of his land to say he came from Virginia. It's a nice document, but it doesn't tell us very much. Actually, I found a lot of information on a completely different site, what you'd call an unofficial site, called the McKinney Maze, which is a private site set up by McKinneys who have been collecting information about their name. And it's a huge site with a lot of information and quite a number of family trees, some of which are a little dubious, but a lot of good information. And they had come to the conclusion, and in this case, I think they may be right, that Abram McKinney was the son of a man called James McKinney, who had been born in Pennsylvania and died in Surry County, North Carolina in 1824. Surry County is on the border with Virginia, and it looks very likely that this James was closely related to a Revolutionary soldier in Virginia called Joseph McKinney. Now, by going to the Fold 3 website, which specializes in military records, www.fold3.com, I was able to pull up Joseph McKinney's military records, his pay, the pay muster rolls for the Captain Harry Terrell's company of the 5th Virginia Battalion, in which he served. So there are a number of entries for Joseph McKinney in this unit. And alongside that, there are 1 or 2 entries for Joseph MACKENZIE in the same regiment at the same time. There is no doubt these are the same people, showing that McKinney was indeed a version of Mackenzie. Now, land records, continuing with land records in the US, we've looked at Federal Land Bureau records, so now looks at state land grants. Each state has done this differently. Some states have put them online and others haven't. A particularly good one that have is North Carolina, where, of course, a huge number of Scots immigrants settled, Scots and Ulster Scots. So you can go to the North Carolina Land Grant Images and Data, which is on www.nclandgrants.com. And there's a search engine there. Put in the name that you're looking for and the county that you're looking for. Now, in this case, I'm not looking for the McKinneys. I've moved on now to a family called Milliken. And this is actually the ancestors of my partner, Carol Milliken, James Milliken, who was living in Mecklenburg County. And so I put that into the search engine and I find 4 entries for James Milliken in Mecklenburg County. And I can click on the link, which brings up the actual image of the patent book, of the page of the patent book, which gives me the details of the land where he lived. Now, once again, once you've found where the emigrant lives, you want to follow the land through, see who it is inherited by or to whom they sell it. And again, in the case of Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, we're very lucky because they have put their register of deeds, the county's register of deeds, digitized and online to search at meckrodhistorical.com. So once again, you have a database, you put in the name you're looking for, and up comes, in this case, a PDF listing the various entries for that name. And it's interesting, again, to see the variety of spellings of the name Milliken. And they have the reference to the book and the page, and you fill that in and you get the original copy of the original deed. So I'm looking at a 1767 deed for James Milliken, and the name has somehow got spelt or transcribed as Millicom, but it's definitely James Milliken. So a very nice, very old record that you can find in this way. So I could go on about all these wonderful things that are available online. You've really just got to go searching for the state that you want, the province, the county, or whatever, and see what's available. But the last thing that I'm going to mention is in many ways the best of all, because if you don't know about this, you need to find out about it. There's a wonderful site called the Internet Archive. The Internet Archive has thousands and thousands of books which have been digitized, freely available for you to read online. And they've got a very good online reading app, which allows you to flip the pages over and read it as if it was a book in front of you. In it, you can find 17th, 18th, and 19th century histories of clans and of families. You can find editions of old historic magazines and journals. You can find national, you can find state and provincial, you can find county, you can find township, you can find community histories, you can find old atlases, all sorts of things. It is an absolute goldmine. And you could spend the rest of your life, I think, just reading stuff on the Internet Archive. But those old histories of states, provinces, towns, clans, and families are absolute gems for the genealogists. All that can be looked at from your computer when you're sitting at home. So go out and have a look, see what you can find. Well, I'm sorry you couldn't see all that. I hope it made some sort of sense just as a verbal thing. And thank you, John. I assume you're still there somewhere.
I am, Graham, and the good news is that we were able to see all your slides.
Good, good.
Jamie and Bill Petrie helped out, and we got them posted. We're running a bit behind, but we do have a good 15 minutes for some discussion and some questions. I just want to find out if Tessa Spencer is with us live. Was she able to join us? She is. Hi, Tessa. How are you? Thank you so much. Thank you so much for staying up late in Scotland.
Well, like Graham.
We saw, well, okay. We saw your very interesting presentation and all of the slides that went with it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
We've got to kind of mind our time here, but we do have about 15 minutes. And let's see if there are some burning questions or issues any one of you would like to bring up about something that maybe one of the others said. Just jump in.
I'll pop right in. And Graham is absolutely right about Internet Archive. It is a wonderful site and has so many, everything from in New York indexes to vital records to those old books that are out of copyright and things like that, county histories, just published genealogies, so many things. I use it all the time. So yeah. I second that, Graham, along with the land records. It's great to see how much you use those.
I always think with the published resources, I always suggest that people look for those, because rather than reinvent the wheel. I'm the treasurer for the Scottish Record Society, which has been going since the late 19th century, and a number of their publications obviously are looking at original sources. For example, some of the Kirk Session records are available there. And we've been working with Tanner Ritchie to make some of the older ones actually like electronic versions of them. And you can purchase them from Tanner Ritchie for not a huge amount of money. And we get lots of interesting inquiries from all kinds of researchers for those.
Anyone else care to share?
I would just like to ask Tessa for an update on when we might be getting the Saycenes available on the virtual volumes, because obviously being stuck at home, that is something I would like to have been able to get at and haven't been able to, but I was told that they are going to be put on the virtual volumes in due course, so I'm looking forward to that.
Graham, I'm afraid I'm not aware of any immediate plans to make the Saycenes available, but I'll certainly ask my colleagues who work in digital services what their plans are. The main ones really are, it's the census, it's the immediate focus, the 1921 census for like later on next year. And I also just touched on the prison registers as well. They're hoping to make, because that's a substantial set, initial batch of those available at some point. There's just so much. Now that we've got the virtual volume search on Scotland's people, enabling people to browse the records, it's just another way of getting in there, isn't it? I didn't mention these in my talk, but one thing that we did release recently, because it's not really related to family history, are the Scottish Cabinet records. So that facility has enabled us to release those records too, where people used to have to go into the archives, to see them. So these new tools are wonderful, I think. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I did ask somebody about this, and because, of course, I mean, you have digitized a lot of the SACEN stuff, and it is available in the virtual volumes in the search room. But that, unfortunately, we can't get in the search room at the moment.
No, neither can I.
It might be worth just saying for our viewers what the SACENs are, because we're talking land records once again, and being able to trace property being sold, bought and sold and inherited. So they are an important record. So it's going to be great when they are made available on your website. So
we've got a couple of questions here that have come in the chat box. I'd like to get them thrown out for discussion before we have to wrap up. So let me just do that very quickly. From Stephen Maxwell, are there any projects underway in Scotland to inventory and digitize copies of records still in private hands? Anybody want to take that?
Well, records in private hands are a bit of a bugbear, I think, because it is true that a lot of records are still held in private hands, and you can go to the National Register of Archives of Scotland catalogue and see who holds what records in private, and they'll tell you who holds them, and they'll maybe even try and help you get in touch with the people to be able to go and visit them. But very often they'll simply say, no, they're our private records, and we're not letting anybody look at them. And in this age of digitization, I think that is pretty disgraceful. I mean, that's our heritage that is being held by the modern day lairds, and we're not allowed to see them. Some people have, for instance, and here I'd be a proud Mackenzie, the Mackenzie of Gairloch, he has put a lot of his private records, he has had them digitized, and he's made them available via the museum in Gairloch. So they're not digitized in terms of being online yet, but maybe they will be. But at least you can go and see records there in a public, virtually a public archive, even though they're his private records. But yeah, I think this is something we all need to work on to try and persuade more people to digitize them and make them available somewhere, even though they're private records that they want to actually keep in their own possession.
Tessa or Sue, do you have anything you'd like to add there before we take another question?
Just very briefly, digitizing records does take resources. So when they are in private hands, somebody ends up bearing the cost of them. And, sometimes it's donations, sometimes it's grants, sometimes it's public funds. But for all those record types, they don't just magically appear. We all put a lot of work behind digitizing records. So when you see indexing projects, volunteer and help.
I mean, I'd like to say I actually worked for the National Register of Archives of Scotland for about 8 years. And we worked very hard to try and allow researchers like yourselves to get access to collections. And I would say actually in my experience that most owners were actually very helpful. Sometimes the most difficult collections actually were business records because of the unstable nature of archives, the businesses closing, people not taking care of their records. But honestly, I think a lot of owners bent over backwards really to help researchers. They might not have been able to digitize them, but they would try and at least give access. Some for local collections actually at NRS, others in local archives, and some actually inevitably ended up kind of deciding to deposit their collections as well. And there are many collections on the NRS register of collections that were privately held that are now held by archives and libraries and so on. So it's a bit of a balance, really.
Yeah, I mean, a great example of somebody that has deposited in the last few years is Cameron of Lochiel, and his records being deposited in the Highland Archives branch in Fort William, which is wonderful for those of us researching in the Highlands.
Here's a, I think, final question. This is from Barbara French. Is there a good resource for employment in late 19th, early 20th centuries? Ships, Carnegie family, industries, etc. Any thoughts on that? Anybody?
I suspect
looks like we tried.
If anybody could answer that, it would be Tessa, but it's asking a lot for her to know whether such records are immediately available.
Well, it depends on I think you need to find out which business it is initially, like if it's the Upper Clyde shipbuilders. I mean, the NRS hold the photographic collection, but some of the employment records I think are held at Glasgow University Archives. I think maybe if you looked at Glasgow University Archive Service, they have a discrete business archive and they list all the different collections within that. And you can also look at kind of more national websites maintained by the National Archives. They give like lists of all the collections held within the UK, and you can search that way. But yeah, you need to sort of kind of hone in a bit, I think.
Talk to librarians and archivists. Don't be afraid to ask them questions. Email, that's there are a lot of your great reference guides. So
Thank you all so much. I'm going to add one last note here before we move on. I was asked by our friend Keith McGregor to remind everyone that Family Tree DNA, which is a DNA research company here in the States, maintains about 200 Scottish surname projects with individuals who have had their DNA done, a particular surname from all across the States, Canada, Scotland, Australia, New Zealand, and elsewhere, who are members of these various surname projects. And if you go online for Family Tree DNA, you can see a list of the names of all of these projects. They have many other ethnic groups that have projects as well, but there's about 200 Scottish surname projects. And if your surname is one of them, you might want to consider joining one of those projects. It's a great way to compare your origins with those of other people in the Scottish diaspora around the world. So I want to thank all. Yeah, go ahead,
please. John, I was just going to say, after the panel last year, I did send information on my DNA to Rob Spencer, who's done a project about tracing DNA, and my mitochondrial DNA, the female line, goes back to Scotland into can't even remember what year BC, about 11,000 BC or something like that. So Scottish women survivors too for DNA.
They told me you were the record holder for ancient DNA records. So congratulations, Sue. Thank you all so much for being with us today. We're going to wrap up this session, and we're going to I'm going to hand off to Lieutenant Governor John Cherry for a wrap up of the day. John is not only the chairman of the trustees for the Detroit Scots, another of our sponsoring organizations, but he's the vice president of COSCA. So we work very closely together. And John, are you with us? You want to take it from here? Maybe he isn't. I see Charlie Sherwood is with us. There's John Cherry. John, you're mute. Can we get John Cherry to unmute?
Yeah, I think
there you are. Okay, John, you're on.
Well, thank you, John. It was very much, these 2 hours were just packed, but I thought that the Lord Lyon really got us off on the right foot when he really characterized this notion of essence of Scottishness as kind of revolving around our origins and our traditions and our heritage. I mean, I think that was a perfect frame for the weekend. And obviously this panel on genealogy really struck at the origin part. Last year, as I recall, and Susan referenced it, we started off with the DNA and how people got to Scotland. And really tonight, these panelists gave us some very detailed information of how we can discover on our own how individuals and families got from Scotland to North America. So I think was a very interesting discussion. And it really points out what the challenge this weekend is going to be, and that is the richness of detail that will be available in all of these discussions as we really begin to get into the tradition heritage portion that the Lord Lyon talked about. And so that frame, I think, will continue to be playing out through the weekend. But again, the detail is going to be so challenging that we'll try to bring people back to that frame as the weekend unfolds. but I thought it was a great start. We're going to start tomorrow bright and early at 9:30. So people should, if you're going to be with us on Saturday, make sure you're signed on by 9:30. And I can tell you that the lineup is going to be very promising, and we'll continue to have I think today was a great start for the conference, and I think tomorrow that's just going to play out with even greater emphasis.
Thank you so much, John. I think we're going to conclude with Charlie Sherwood, who is secretary of COSCA, the organization I'm president of, and he's also president of his Clan Society, the Clan Scott Society. I think Charlie has a toast for us. Charlie, you're on.
Very good. We'll close this session, which has been a wonderful session these first few hours, and there's going to be a wonderful conference all week. If folks can charge their glasses, if you are so inclined, 2022 is going to be the year of the story in Scotland. So I'm going to propose tonight's toast using the words of two of her greatest storytellers, Robert Burns and Sir Walter Scott. Scott observed, after being wined and dined in France on one of his many trips there, "I wish for a sheep's head and a whiskey against all the French cookery and champagne in the world." And Burns wrote in a letter, "The whiskey of this country is the most rascally liquor, and by consequence, only drunk by the most rascally part of its inhabitants." With that, Slàinte.
Slàinte. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We're going to sign off for the evening. As John and Charlie mentioned, we start off tomorrow morning bright and early, 9:30 Eastern Time, which is what, 2:30 Greenwich Mean Time for our friends in Scotland. And for the Scots, thank you for staying up late and being with us. And for all of us in North America, we're off to a good start. We have Saturday and Sunday sessions, so we'll see you tomorrow. Going to sign off now. Good night.
All I need in life is a little time and my friends. All I need in life is a little love, it's worthwhile. 'Cause when we arrive in the days and the night,